Kira remembered the day the collectors came to her world, like it was burned into her mind forever. She had been young then, barely 12 solar cycles old, playing in the crystal gardens with her sisters when the sky turned dark with ships. The Valori were not fighters, and everyone knew this truth. Her people were small and delicate with skin that glowed soft blue in the darkness and wings, like spun glass that caught the light in 1,000 colors. They were poets and singers and dreamers, who spent their days creating beautiful things and their nights watching the stars when the consortium warships descended upon their colony world. The Valori had no weapons to fight back and no armies to defend themselves. The collectors wore black armor and carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy, and they spoke of debts and interest and payments owed. Kira did not understand the words they used, but she understood the fear in her mother's eyes and the way her father stood in front of his family, like he could somehow protect them with his small body. The debts went back 3 generations, they said. Her great-grandparents had taken a loan during the Great Famine just to survive, and now that loan had grown into something monstrous. The consortium had come to collect what was owed, and what was owed was everything. They took the adults first, and then they came for the children. Kira screamed for her mother as armored hands dragged her away, but her mother was already gone, and the crystal gardens were burning and her world was ending. That was 3 years ago now. Kira stood on an auction platform in the cold heart of Nexus Station with a metal collar around her throat that shocked her whenever she felt too much emotion. Her beautiful wings had been cut down to stumps because the buyers did not like it when their property could fly away. Around her stood 46 other Valori waiting to be sold like animals at a market. The auction house was vast and filled with creatures from a dozen different worlds. Kira saw the insectoid Chiracs with their clicking mandibles examining the slaves with cold compound eyes. She saw the massive 4-armed Gorvon testing the muscle density of the stronger captives. She saw the serpentine Scythine tasting the air with their forked tongues, their eyes lingering on the younger and prettier slaves with obvious hunger. The auctioneer was a fat creature with gray skin and tiny eyes that held no mercy and no soul. He called out numbers and specifications like he was selling furniture and not living, breathing people. Kira watched her childhood friends sold one by one. Mira, who used to sing the most beautiful songs, was bought by a mining corporation and dragged away. Screaming little Tem, who was only 9 cycles old, was purchased by a Chirax hive for purposes Kira did not want to imagine. She had stopped crying 3 auctions ago because the collar punished her for tears and because she had no tears left to give. When her turn came, the auctioneer read from his datapad in a bored voice. Lot 34, he announced to the crowd. Valori female young adult, intact cognitive function, minor wing damage, starting bid 4,000 credits. A Scythine, inexpensive. Robes raised 1 clawed hand. 5,000 credits, it hissed, and Kira saw the symbol on its collar. She knew that symbol from whispered horror stories. The pleasure gardens of Sithis Prime was a place where Valori went and never returned from 6,000 called it Chirax, 8,000 the Scythine countered. The bids climbed higher and Kira felt herself drifting away from her own body, retreating into some deep place where the numbers could not reach her and the fear could not touch her. 15,000, said a new voice. The entire auction hall went silent. Kira's eyes found the bidder and confusion cut through her numbness like a blade. The creature was strange, unlike anything she had seen before. It stood on 2 legs and wore battered combat armor that had clearly seen many battles. Its face was bare with no scales or chitin or fur, just soft skin marked with scars. It had hair only on its head, dark and cut short, and its eyes were a color Kira had never seen before, brown, like fertile soil and burning with something she could not name. She had heard stories about humans. Everyone in the galaxy had heard the stories. They were newcomers to the stars, having only discovered faster than light travel about a century ago. Most species considered them primitives who were too emotional and too violent and too unpredictable to be trusted. What was a human doing here with that kind of money? And why was it looking at her with those strange burning eyes? 15,000. To the human, the auctioneer said, clearly unsettled by this development. Do I hear 16? The Scythian's tongue flickered with rage, and its eyes narrowed with cruel desire. 16,000. It hissed louder this time. 25,000, the human said without any hesitation at all. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Kira felt her heart stop. That was an insane price for a damaged, bellowy slave with clipped wings. The Scythian considered for a long moment, its serpentine body coiling with frustrated anger. But finally it made a gesture of disgusted withdrawal and slithered back into the crowd. Sold to the human for 25,000 credits. Guards escorted Kira off the platform and transferred her ownership chip to the human's account. The whole process took less than a minute. Her entire life reduced to nothing but a data transfer. The human looked at her for a long moment and up close. She could see the weariness carved into those strange features. But there was something else in those brown eyes too. Something that looked almost like pain. Can you walk? The human asked in a voice that was rough but not unkind. Kira nodded because she did not trust her voice to work. Good, the human said, and stay close because we are leaving this place. The human ship was small and battered with scorch marks on the hull and patches where repairs had been made. It was called the Defiant Grace according to the faded letters painted near the airlock as the door sealed behind them. Kira waited for instructions. She waited for commands. She waited for the caller to shock her into compliance with whatever this creature wanted from her. Instead, the human pulled a small device from a pocket and pressed a button. The suppression collar clicked and fell from Kira's throat. She staggered backward, gasping as emotions flooded through her for the first time in months. Her skin flickered with wild bioluminescence, responding to feelings she had been forced to suppress for so long. That collar is illegal in 47 systems, the human said, while moving toward the pilot seat. The consortium uses them anyway, because no one enforces the law. There was a pause, and then the human spoke again. My name is Marcus Cole, and I used to be a sergeant in the Earth Defense Force. You can call me Marcus. Kira rubbed her throat, where the collar had burned her skin for so long. What do you want from me? She managed to ask. Right now I want you to sit down and buckle, and Marcus replied, while running his hands over the ship's controls. After that, I want you to eat something because you look like you have not had a real meal in weeks. Then I want you to sleep somewhere that is not a cage. I do not understand, Kira said, and her voice cracked with confusion and fear and desperate hope. You bought me. Marcus's hands stopped moving, and he turned to look at her with those strange brown eyes. I bought your contract, Kira, because that was the only legal way to get you off that platform. His voice grew rough with barely controlled emotion. But I do not own people, and no one should ever own anyone. The ship's engines hummed to life, and the deck vibrated beneath Kira's feet. I am taking you somewhere safe, Marcus continued while turning back to the controls. After you have recovered, you can go wherever you want, and I will help you get there. If you have family left, I will help you find them. But first, we need to get out of consortium space, and that is going to be complicated. As the Defiant Grace lifted off from Nexus Station, and the stars began to wheel past the viewport, Kira felt something stir in her chest. It was small and fragile, and she was afraid to trust it, but she could not stop it from blooming inside her like the first light of dawn after an endless night. It was hope. For the first time in 3 years, Kira dared to hope. The journey through consortium space took 11 standard days, and every single one of them was dangerous. Marcus flew the Defiant Grace through dark routes and abandoned shipping lanes, always watching the sensors for patrol ships and always ready to run. He bribed dock officials with credits he clearly could not afford to lose, and he went without food so that Kira could eat properly. Kira learned many things about humans during those 11 days. She learned that they ate strange preserved foods that they heated in a small cooking area, and that Marcus always gave her the larger portions, even when his own hand shook with hunger. She learned that humans needed to sleep every single day for several hours at a time, and that they dreamed. While they slept, sometimes Marcus dreamed badly, and Kira heard sounds coming from his sleeping area that made her heart ache with a sadness she did not fully understand. She learned that humans sweated when they were stressed and that their hearts beat faster when they were afraid. They were fragile creatures in many ways with no natural armor and no claws and no venom to protect themselves. But they were also stubborn in a way that amazed her. Marcus worked 18 hours at a time without complaint, pushing through exhaustion that would have killed a Valori when a consortium patrol came close to finding them. He fought the ship through an asteroid field with reflexes that seemed impossible for such a soft and vulnerable species. And when they finally escaped into clear space, his only response was to check on Kira and ask if she was hungry. On the 8th day, Kira finally asked him the question that had been burning in her mind since the auction. "Why do you do this, Marcus?" They were drifting in the shadow of a massive gas giant, waiting for a patrol to pass before making their next jump. Outside, the viewport storms, the size of entire planets, turned into magnificent silence. Marcus was quiet for a very long time, and Kira thought he might not answer at all. Then he spoke in a voice that was heavy with old pain. "I was stationed on a planet called Kepler 442b during one of the consortium's debt collections." He said the words debt collection like they tasted of poison. There was a refugee camp on that world with families who had fled from 3 different star systems, trying to find safety. The consortium decided that those refugees were assets belonging to the debtor worlds, and they came to collect them. "How many people?" Kira asked. 12,000, Marcus replied, and his hands clenched into fists. "Mostly children and elderly, because the young and strong had stayed behind to fight. My unit was stationed there as neutral observers, because Earth was not part of the consortium and we had no legal standing to get involved. We were ordered to stand down and watch and document everything for the historical record." Kira felt cold, despite the warmth of the ship. "What did you do?" Marcus finally looked at her, and his brown eyes burned with an old fire that had never gone out. "I disobeyed my orders." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of what he had done and what it had cost him. "How many did you save?" "Not enough," Marcus said, and the fire in his eyes dimmed to ash. "Never enough." He stood abruptly and moved to check the sensors, even though he had checked them only minutes before. "I saved 408 people that day, Kira. 408 out of 12,000. The consortium captured my unit afterward, and most of my squad was executed as an example to others who might think about interfering. I escaped, but barely, and Earth discharged me from military service and exiled me from Earth space." He let out a breath that might have been a laugh, but held no humor. "I am a war criminal in 40 systems and a hero in exactly none." Kira did not know what to say, so she said nothing. She simply sat with him in the silence and let him know that he was not alone. After a while, Marcus returned to his seat and continued monitoring their course. Over the next 3 days, Kira learned more. She learned that Marcus had been doing this for 4 years, rescuing people from consortium auctions, one small group at a time. She learned that he had saved 17 people before her, and that none of them had been human. He spent every credit he earned on bribes and fuel and auction prices, and he lived on almost nothing so that others could live free. On the 11th day, they crossed the karate boundary and left consortium space behind. Beyond this invisible line, a loose alliance of free worlds operated under different laws where slavery was not just technically illegal, but actually enforced by a coalition fleet that had fought 3 wars to keep the consortium out. The Defiant Grace limped into port at Sanctuary Station, a massive habitat built into an asteroid that had become a haven for refugees and runaways and anyone who needed a place to hide. "There are Valori here," Marcus said as they prepared to dock. About 200 of them are survivors from different collection actions, and they have built a community in the lower sectors. Kira felt her damaged wings tremble at the thought. Her own people living and free. She had not dared to dream of such a thing. But as she moved toward the airlock, she stopped and turned back to face Marcus. "What happens to you now?" Marcus was running diagnostics on the ship's struggling engine. And he did not look up. "I resupply and take whatever work I can find. And then I go back." Back, Kira asked, and her voice rose with disbelief. "To Consortium space. There is another auction in 3 weeks in the Coven system." His voice was flat and tired. Like he was reading from a script he had memorized long ago. 60 Valori are on the block, including some children. Kira felt something fierce bloom in her chest, and her bioluminescence flared bright. "You cannot save them all, Marcus. You are one. Human with one ship against an entire empire that spans 1,000 star systems." No, Marcus agreed, and he finally looked up at her with those weary brown eyes. "But I can save some of them, and some is better than none." Kira wanted to argue with him. She wanted to tell him that he would die doing this, eventually caught and killed, and made an example just like his squad. She wanted to tell him that his death would help no one, and that the universe needed him alive. But she looked at those strange human eyes, and she saw something there that she recognized from the oldest stories her grandmother used to tell. Stories about heroes who stood against impossible darkness, not because they thought they could win, but because standing was the right thing to do. "I want to help," she said. Marcus shook his head immediately. "You need to heal first, and find your people, and rest." And then Kira asked. He was quiet for a moment, and then almost against his will, a smile crossed his scarred face. It was small and tired, but it was real, and it made him look younger and almost hopeful. Then we will see Kira walk down the ramp into Sanctuary Station, and for the first time in 3 years, she breathed air that was not filled with fear. Somewhere in the lower sectors, her people were waiting for her. Somewhere behind her, a human who had bought her freedom with everything he had was preparing to go back into the darkness. She did not know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not let Marcus Cole fight alone forever. 3 months passed on Sanctuary Station, and Kira began to remember who she had been before the collectors came. She found the Valori community in the lower sectors, just as Marcus had promised, and they welcomed her like a lost sister. There were 212 of them, now survivors from a dozen different worlds, who had found their way to freedom through luck or rescue or desperate courage. They shared their food and their stories and their grief, and slowly Kira began to heal. The medical specialists among her people examined the stumps where her wings had been and shook their heads with sorrow. The damage was too severe for her wings to ever grow back naturally, but they fitted her with prosthetics made of light metal and synthetic membrane that let her glide through the air even if she could never truly fly again. She ate proper food that made her bioluminescence glow strong and healthy. She slept in safety without the fear of waking to chains and collars. She began to laugh again and to sing the old songs her mother had taught her. But even as she healed, she could not forget Marcus Cole and his endless war. She studied everything she could find about ships and navigation and consortium patrol patterns. She trained with the Valori Defense Volunteers, learning not combat because her body was not built for fighting, but tactics and reconnaissance and how to read a battlefield. She learned to use communication equipment and encryption codes and sensor systems. Every night she waited for news of the Defiant Grace. Marcus came back on day 91. His ship was damaged with scorch marks, fresh on the hull and entire sections, sparking with electrical fires. His body was even more damaged. Kira found him in the station's medical bay being treated for plasma burns that covered half his chest and a collapsed lung and what the doctors called severe psychological exhaustion. When he saw her, he tried to smile even though it clearly hurt him. "Got some of them," he rasped through cracked lips. "You almost died," Kira said, and her voice shook with emotions she could not name. Almost does not count. She sat beside his bed and watched the monitors track his healing. Humans were such strange creatures. She thought they were fragile and soft with no natural defenses against a hostile universe. But they were also impossibly stubborn, running on nothing but willpower and determination when their bodies should have stopped working long ago. The doctors said that any other species would have died from his injuries, but Marcus Cole simply refused to give up. When he woke, she was still sitting beside him. "You need a crew," she said. Without greeting, "Crews cost money," Marcus replied, and his voice was already stronger than it should have been. "You need all eyes." Kira leaned forward and let him see the fire in her bioluminescent eyes. "There are people on this station who would fight for you, Marcus. People you saved, who would die for you if you asked. But you will not ask for help. You just keep going back alone, taking impossible risks like you are trying to." She stopped herself. "Like I am trying to what?" Marcus asked quietly. "Like you are trying to die for what happened at Kepler 442b. The silence between them was heavy and painful. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely more than a whisper. 408. "What?" "That is how many I saved when I disobeyed orders." He closed his eyes, and Kira could see the weight of memory pressing down on him. 408 out of 12,000. I replay it every night in my dreams, wondering if I could have saved more. If I had been faster or smarter or braver. I see the faces of everyone I could not save, and they ask me why I lived. When they died, Kira reached out and took his hand. Human hands were strange, with 5 fingers and no claws and skin. So soft, it seemed impossible that they could survive in a dangerous universe. But his hand was warm and strong, and she held it tightly. "You are a hero to the 408, she said, "and to the 17 you saved after that, and to the 23 you just brought home." She squeezed his hand and let her light pulse with gentle warmth. "You are a hero to me, Marcus Cole." Marcus opened his eyes, and she saw tears there for the first time since she had known him. "I cannot stop," he said, "even knowing that it will probably kill me someday. I cannot stop. I close my eyes and I see those children in chains, and I have to do something. Even if it is not enough, then do not stop," Kira said, and she stood with her prosthetic wings catching the light, but stopped doing it alone. Within 1 month, they had a crew. Threk was a Gorvon who stood 8 feet tall, with 4 massive arms and a heart that burned with righteous anger. He had escaped from indentured servitude in the consortium's factories, where he had been forced to work. Until his body broke, his wife and children had not escaped, and he wanted revenge on the system that had destroyed his family. 2 humans came next, both of them deserters from the Earth Defense Force who had heard whispers about Marcus Cole and his impossible crusade. Sarah Chen was a pilot who could fly anything with an engine, and she had left Earth after refusing orders to abandon a refugee convoy. David Okonkwo was an engineer who could keep any ship running with nothing but spare parts and stubbornness. They came to Sanctuary Station looking for something worth fighting for, and they found it in Marcus Cole. More volunteers arrived over the following weeks. Valori survivors who had learned to fight and refused to let others suffer as they had suffered. A Chirax named Click who had broken free from his hive mind and discovered that he had a conscience. Even a young Scythian named Whisper who had rejected the cruelty of her people and wanted to prove that not all snakes were monsters. They called themselves the Liberators, and they began to hunt. Their first mission was a transport ship carrying 30 enslaved workers to a mining colony. They hit it fast and hard and freed every single captive without losing anyone. Their second mission was a holding facility on a moon where the consortium processed new slaves. Before sending them to auction, they burned it to the ground and rescued over 100 people. Word began to spread through the dark spaces between stars. There was a group fighting back against the consortium, a crew of misfits and outcasts led by a human who refused to accept that slavery was just the way things were. Some called them terrorists and criminals. Others called them heroes. The consortium called them a problem that needed to be eliminated, but every time the consortium sent ships to hunt them, the liberators slipped away into the darkness and struck somewhere else. They were ghosts haunting the slave routes. They were a nightmare that the consortium could not wake up from, and at the heart of it all was Marcus Cole, a scarred and tired human who had found something he had lost at Kepler 442b. Hope Kira watched him change over those months, watched the weight lift from his shoulders, bit by bit, as he realized he was not alone anymore. He still had nightmares, and he still pushed himself too hard, but now there were people to catch him when he fell. Now there was a family bound not by blood, but by purpose, and the consortium had finally begun to fear them. The trap was obvious from the moment they heard about it. The consortium announced a special auction at Nexus Station, the same station where Kira had been sold 5 years ago. 200 Valori children were on the block, orphans from collapsed colonies, being sold as a single lot to the highest bidder. It was bait, and everyone knew it. The consortium had studied Marcus Cole and his crew for years now. They knew he could not ignore children in chains. They knew he would come even if it meant his death. Marcus gathered his crew in the common room of the Defiant Grace and laid out the situation without hiding anything. "This is a trap," he said flatly. "They want us to come, and they will be waiting with everything they have." The room was silent as his crew absorbed the truth. "We could skip this one," Sarah said, but her voice made it clear she did not mean it. "Find another target and live to fight another day." "We could," Threk rumbled from his corner. "But we will not." Marcus shook his head. "No, we will not." He looked around the room at the faces of people who had followed him into darkness again and again. "I am not going to order any of you to come with me. This is probably a one-way trip. I understand if you want to stay behind." Kira stepped forward, and her bioluminescence blazed with fierce light. "We did not join you because we wanted to be safe, Marcus. We joined you because we believe in something." Every member of the crew nodded, and Marcus looked at them with something like wonder in his tired eyes. "All right." Then he said, "Let us go save some children." They jumped into the Nexus system, and the trap closed around them immediately. 5 consortium warships surrounded the Defiant Grace before they even reached the station. 100 soldiers in combat armor waited at every dock, and on the main communication channel, a consortium executive announced their fate. Marcus Cole came, the voice smooth and cruel and satisfied. "You are charged with theft of consortium property and destruction of consortium assets and crimes against the commercial order. Surrender now, and your crew will be given quick deaths. Resist, and you will watch them die slowly before we execute you." Marcus looked at his crew one more time. "Options?" He asked. "Fight," said Threk, "and die with honor." The children said Kira, "and we cannot abandon them." An alert flashed on the sensor console. Then another. Then a dozen more new ships were appearing at the edge of the system, dropping out of faster than light travel like stars, being born. 1 ship, and then 5, and then 20, and then more than anyone could count. Human ships, not military vessels, but freighters and personal craft and mining ships and cargo haulers. Anything that could fly and carry a weapon was appearing in the system. Hundreds of ships pouring in like a tide of steel and fury. A new voice crackled over the communications channel, rough and angry, and absolutely fearless consortium vessels. "This is the Free Fleet of Earth. We are here for Marcus Cole and the children you stole. You have one chance to stand down." The consortium executive sputtered with outrage. "Earth has no jurisdiction here. This is a violation of 12 treaties and 40 trade agreements. You will be sanctioned and embargoed and destroyed." The voice on the other end did not hesitate. "We know, and we do not care." The battle was short but savage. Consortium warships were advanced and professional with trained crews and powerful weapons. But they were facing humans who had decided that being right mattered more than being safe. The Free Fleet attacked without formation or coordination, each ship fighting with desperate individual fury. They took horrible losses, with ships exploding like fireworks against the darkness of space. But for every human ship that died, two more took its place, and they kept coming and coming and coming. Kira learned later what had happened. Word of Marcus Cole and the Liberators had spread through human space, carried by refugees and soldiers and ordinary people who heard the stories and felt something stir in their hearts. Underground networks had formed, raising money and gathering ships and waiting for the moment when they would be needed. When news of the trap at Nexus Station reached them, they had mobilized everything they had. 300 ships crewed by humans who did not know each other and had never trained together, but who shared one unshakable belief that slavery was wrong, and that doing nothing was not an option. While the space battle raged, Marcus led his crew in an assault on the station itself. They fought through corridors filled with consortium soldiers, Threx smashing through armor with his 4 massive fists. While Sarah and David provided covering fire, Kira guided them through the station's layout, which she remembered from her own time in chains. They reached the holding cells where 200 children huddled in cages, too afraid to even cry. Marcus stood in front of them with his weapon raised, ready to kill anyone who tried to take them, but no one came. The consortium guards had fled when they realized the battle was lost. Kira found Marcus there, still standing guard, even though the fighting was over. His armor was cracked and burned, and blood ran from a dozen wounds, but he would not lower his weapon. "Marcus," she said gently, "it is over. We won." He did not move. "Marcus," she stepped closer and put her hand on his arm. "It is over." The weapon fell from his hands and clattered to the floor. Marcus Cole, the one-man army who had haunted consortium space for years, fell to his knees, and he wept. The children gathered around him, drawn by some instinct that told them this broken human had saved them. They held him with their small hands as he cried out years of grief and guilt and desperate hope. Kira knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around him and let her light pulse with warmth and love. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved them. All of them." For a long moment, Marcus could not speak. Then he looked up at the children surrounding him with their huge eyes and their trembling wings, and for the first time since Kepler 442b, he let himself believe that maybe it had been enough. Maybe this time it was finally enough. The battle at Nexus Station changed everything. News of what had happened spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by 1,000 different voices in 1,000 different languages. 300 human ships had defied their own government to save children they had never met. They had bled and died for strangers simply because it was the right thing to do. Earth's official government condemned the free fleet, calling them pirates and terrorists and criminals who had violated sacred treaties. But the people of Earth saw something different. They saw videos of human ships burning as they charged toward consortium warships. They saw images of Marcus Cole and his crew carrying children to safety through smoke and fire. They saw the faces of 200 orphans who were alive because ordinary humans had refused to look away, and something shifted in the human spirit. Within 1 year, Earth had withdrawn from all trade agreements with the consortium. Within 2 years, they had joined the Karate Coalition, bringing their shipyards and their soldiers and their strange, stubborn belief that every thinking creature deserved to be free. The consortium tried to fight back. They had grown fat and wealthy on the backs of slaves, and their entire economy depended on free labor. They sent threats and sanctions, and eventually warships to remind humanity of their place in the galactic order. But they had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that humans were like other species. They thought humans would be reasonable and calculate the costs and benefits, and decide that peace was better than war. They thought humans could be frightened into submission. They were completely and catastrophically wrong. Humans did not fight because they could win. They fought because they believed that fighting was right, even if winning was impossible. They were emotional and irrational, and absolutely unwilling to accept cruelty as the natural order of things. The Liberation War lasted 5 years. It spread across 100 star systems and cost millions of lives, human and otherwise. It was brutal and bloody and terrible in ways that Kira could barely comprehend. But at the end of those 5 years, the consortium's slave markets were nothing but ashes and memory. The last auction house burned on a cold morning, and Kira stood in the crowd watching the flames rise toward the stars. Beside her, Marcus was quiet, his scarred face lit orange by the fire. He had become a symbol during the war, a legend that human soldiers carried into battle like a banner. Admiral Marcus Cole, they called him now, though he had never wanted the title. He had led fleets and planned campaigns and watched good people die for the cause. He had started in a battered ship with nothing but anger and hope. The war had aged him. His hair was gray now, and new scars crossed the old ones, and sometimes Kira saw him staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much. But he had survived. Against all odds and all expectations, he had lived to see the end. When the fire finally died down, Marcus spoke. "I never thought I would see this," he said quietly. "I never really believed it would end." Kira took his hand, that strange 5-fingered human hand she had learned to love. "It ended because of you. It ended because of everyone," he replied. "I just struck the match, and the universe did the rest." "That is not nothing," Kira said. "No," he admitted with the ghost of a smile. "I suppose it is not." They walked together through the celebrating crowds, past Valori and Gurvan and Chirax, and humans all mixed together in joy. The old divisions seemed to matter less now. The war had forged something new, a bond between species who had fought side by side for something greater than themselves. They made their way to the memorial wall, a vast surface of polished black stone that stretched toward the sky. Carved into its surface were names, millions of names, every being who had died in the liberation. War was remembered here. Soldiers and civilians and freed slaves who did not survive long enough to see freedom. Marcus found a section near the bottom and traced the letters with his fingers. Kira recognized the names from his stories, his old squad. From Kepler 442b, the ones who had been executed for following him when he disobeyed orders. They finally got justice. Kira said softly. Marcus nodded, but his eyes were distant. "I used to dream about them every night. They would ask me why I lived." When they died, he was quiet for a moment. "But lately the dreams have changed. Now they tell me it is okay to rest." Kira felt tears on her cheeks, though she could not say when she had started crying. "What now?" she asked. "The war is over and the consortium is gone. What does Marcus Cole do when there is no one left to save?" He considered the question seriously, looking out at the crowds of free beings, celebrating in streets that had once been slave markets. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have been fighting for so long, I am not sure I remember anything else." "You could learn," Kira said. She turned to face him and let her bioluminescence pulse with all the love she felt. "We could learn together." Marcus looked at her. He looked at the prosthetic wings that let her fly again. He looked at the light in her eyes that had grown brighter every year as the chains of her past fell away. She was not the broken girl he had bought at auction anymore. She was a leader and a warrior and a beacon of hope for her people, and she loved him in a way that made no logical sense, but felt absolutely right. "They sold you to the stars," he said quietly. "You bought my freedom with blood," she replied. "I would do it again." There was no hesitation in his voice, no doubt. "A 1,000 times," I know. Kira smiled, and it was easy now, natural, without fear. "That is why I love you, Marcus Cole." She kissed him there in the shadow of the memorial wall, surrounded by the names of the fallen and the sounds of the living, two survivors of a war that should never have happened, finding peace in each other at last. Above them, the stars shone cold and bright and beautiful. The same stars that had witnessed so much cruelty now looked down on a galaxy that was finally beginning to change. Humans had done this, stubborn, irrational, impossible humans who felt things too deeply and fought for ideas that made no economic sense. The galaxy had called them primitives, and it had been right in a way. Humans were primitive in their beliefs. They believed that freedom mattered and that cruelty was wrong, and that every life had value regardless of what it could produce or how much it cost. They believed these things with their whole hearts, and they were willing to burn the universe down to make them true. And in the end, that was enough. In the end, that was everything Marcus held Kira close as the celebration continued around them, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt something he had almost forgotten existed: peace. Not the absence of war, but the presence of hope. Not the end of struggle, but the beginning of something new. They had a future now. All of them did. And whatever came next, they would face it together. The stars had tried to break them. The stars had failed.